Christmas Carol has been retold a lot. It really is a timeless tale where Scrooge learns generosity, or as some might say, decency. There's a Smurfs one, a Mickey Mouse one, Doctor Who gave it a go. You have Scrooge in the past with a present tense name, you have Scrooge in the present with a past tense name, even one with Ross Bloody Kemp, who's in a gang. Unbelievable. But there is one adaptation which for me rises above the rest. As everyone else reaches up for greatness, something sits on their hand, like a fuzzy felt puppet. No, not that one.
The Muppet Christmas Carol, released in 1992 by director Brian Henson, son of Muppet mogul Jim Henson. It was the fourth Muppet film and the first to be made after Jim's passing. The screenplay was written by Jerry Juhl, head writer of The Muppet Show, and they even got two-time Oscar winner Michael Caine to play Scrooge. In spite of the resume of its creators, the film did shockingly average at the box office, being beaten by Home Alone 2 and Aladdin. On top of that, it wasn't adored by critics, with the New York Times and Chicago Tribune citing problems with the script, finding the music unremarkable, but they did laud the production as one of the film's strongest assets. In recent years, it would seem that the reception to The Muppets Christmas Carol has warmed, with The Telegraph and The Guardian giving it 5 stars in 2016 and 2017 respectively. So, why the shift in reception? Has the openly deteriorating world around us led to a greater appreciation for nostalgia? Or, like Scrooge himself, did it just take some time to embrace something this festive? Perhaps looking into Christmas past will provide some answers. After the studio credits, we're welcomed into the film with a long take flying over 19th century London. The set in the sequence is a great taste of the film's visual style, looking stylized and festive, just as you want a puppet Christmas to be. The credits list off Muppets as actors, which is really cute. It's rare to see an opening crawl that I appreciate this much, with the visuals, the credit, even the typography being pitch perfect, and that's before you notice the overture. Now, to be fair to critics at the release of this film, this overture isn't going to rob your sock drawer if you're the first time viewer. There's nothing wrong with it, it's a strong piece, but it isn't in full effect. If you're like me, or the other millennials, Gen Z, rewatching this as part of your yearly tradition, you notice the magic of this piece. You know the end of Hamilton, where everyone praises all these different musical motifs coming together for an emotional dropkick? The overture does just that. You can pick out most of the major musical motifs right at the beginning of the film. If this were an original story, it might have been an odd choice to kick the film off with this, but bear in mind, this is a Christmas Carol. A retelling of a story that everyone already knows, making this musical microcosm a really clever preface to the movie. We slide down from the rooftops and into a scene of Muppets and humans going about the market. You get a feel for the world where aristocratic pigs roam the streets and screaming vegetables get stolen without prompting a reaction. This helps establish the fun, wacky world that the Muppets always build, but also gives us Dickens' first real influence, with the poor having to steal their food. If only they did make Muppets Les Miserables. We then get our introduction to the film's narrators, the Great Gonzo as Charles Dickens and Rizzo the Rat as Rizzo the Rat. These two are given some real life through excellent puppeteering, voice work and writing. They're two Muppets who don't normally get much time together, and it's interesting to see, especially when they get to react to the main man himself, Michael Caine as
a shrewd moneylender named Ebenezer Scrooge. You will meet him as he comes around that corner.
Where?
There.
When?
Now. There he is, Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge.
Again, like Hamilton, our finance-focused protagonist is introduced in a song by other members of the ensemble, and this song is great, showing how Scrooge's disdain has not only begotten disdain back at him, but even moments of pity for the
Even the vegetables don't like him.
The song acknowledges, at his core, Scrooge is not evil. He's just lonely, he's just sad. Even then, no amount of sympathy can excuse this.
Oh, Jesus for us, Mises.
Come on, dude, those Mises need their cheeses. We come to a scene of Scrooge at his office with Bob Cratchit, played here by Kermit the Frog. The rats in this part get some cute, albeit childish moments that a more sophisticated, read pretentious, so-and-so might see as cause for derision, but it's fun. It's also a scene where we're introduced to Scrooge's nephew, who isn't a Muppet because the world may never be ready for Muppet crossbreeding, and Britain's favourite scientists, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and Beaker, playing a pair of charity collectors. As per usual with these two, there are some really fun puppetry moments.
These two actually had a song which got cut from the film. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'd hardly say it's missed. At any rate, it's not the cut song that's actually worth talking about.
As Bob and the bookkeepers close up for Christmas, Kermit sings one of the film's most memorable songs. The lyrics and instrumentation, whilst not exceeding expectations, are completely serviceable and create a lovely sense of Christmassy anticipation. It's obviously bolstered by the visuals, which are doing the real heavy lifting in the scene. Like, look at these rats, or the penguins, or this great moody shot of the stars. It's a song for the eyes, which makes it extremely understandable that the critics thought the music a bit mediocre, exacerbated by the vocal performance. This was Kermit's first outing without Jim Henson's voice, and even though Steve Whitmire has proven his talent in vocal work and puppetry before, he couldn't escape the problem Muppet songs can bring. Singing is by no means a simple art, doubly so when doing silly voices, and as a result, Muppet songs can come off as a little too simple when contrasted with the chaos that's on screen. Of course, some get away from it, like The Rainbow Connection or even Scrooge, the latter a big Broadway opener constantly switching characters, and the former an intimate display only strengthened by imperfections. In songs like this, though, it becomes clear that there aren't really any strong singers in the film. Or at least, there weren't for a long time. We cut back to Scrooge at his home. He's in the dark and uneasy, with the lighting and cinematography doing everything to convince you that there's eeriness in this house. Even the score gets a bit creepy, and when used in conjunction with Michael Caine's restraint, we get a window into Scrooge's paranoia. He knows he hasn't much longer left to live, and his fears of death and vulnerability are worn beautifully. One could almost forget this is a film about the sickly child of a pig and a frog.
It creates a nice moody scene, but I don't know, it's missing a little something, a little zest. Bingo!
Look, it's Ebenezer Scrooge!
Statler and Waldorf as Jacob and Robert Marley is top-tier casting. They're the ideal candidates to revel in their misdeeds without losing likability, and likewise, they can suffer on screen without gaining sympathy. It's also with the Marleys we get our next number, and it is gorgeous. Marley and Marley is underscored with the clinking of chains. I really like that. It not only textures the music, but with the sound of ghostly chains, it means that even if Scrooge were to turn away or close his eyes, he wouldn't be rid of that sound, he wouldn't be rid of his evil deeds. This, mixed with the brass and the xylophone in the score, make a fun and sinister villain song. The song even gets away from that Muppet song problem I mentioned, thanks to the pure expression that bleeds from these old ghosts. Expression found in their movements.
They only perform in a small area, but the way they move gives them so much weight and presence.
Nothing here moves with that airy elegance one expects ghosts to. The Marleys and their irons bob and tug like it's all so laborious, and this oppressive tone is topped with Caine's reaction to it all. Firstly, the harsh white light they're pushing onto him. It's almost like a criminal interrogation, or the judgmental light of God. His body language is so restrained and uncomfortable, and his voice so weak and pleading, that he can barely hold back his fear as he sees himself in the Marleys' place before long. The Marleys are slurped up, and Rizzo reminds us to kiss our homies once in a while. Back in the house, Scrooge meets the ghost of Christmas past, and ew! 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 It's a good puppet. I like the way they blow out the camera in their introduction. It helps sell their power. I like that it's portrayed as a young child. It establishes a nice through line with the rest of the spirits, but it clashes so much with every other puppet or person in the film. Look at them next to Gonzo, or Kermit, or even the other ghosts. The design really stands out. When the ghost brings us to the memory of Scrooge's schoolhouse, we see the seed of his fixation with
Business.
We also see Gonzo and Rizzo's background shenanigans, and this sets the tone for most of the film. Scrooge goes through trauma, Scrooge reflects on his actions, while the Muppets do something zany.
That might sound like derision, but I think this sort of paddleball tone really works in the film's favour. Scrooge is so emotionally dead at points that he can witness these unsettling events that really hurt him and not have to make a big reaction out of it. So when it's offset with a joke, it's quickly balanced out. But then, when the film wants to make something that's a lot more emotionally complex, a lot more hurtful to the audience, they take the comedy away completely and let this tragic moment exist in a vacuum. That's pretty much what happens with Christmas Future, and those scenes are incredible. It's a bit like BoJack Horseman, but, you know, for kids.
We come to a party in Scrooge's youth, hosted by the surprisingly underutilized Fozzie Bear.
To be fair, they probably read the book, saw there was a character called Foswick in it, and thought, well, we're never gonna get a better chance to make this pun.
It's just odd to see him this briefly. The Electric Mayhem gives Miles Goodman another opportunity to flex his score with this super bombastic little piece as Scrooge meets with the love of his life, Belle. It's very telling that before Scrooge meets Belle, he's pretty close to the man we know from the beginning of the film. When she comes into his life, one thinks he would start to change from someone obsessed with money to one who might value his emotions, who might see to love. The fact that he doesn't, the Belle can't change him, and he can only be this person if he decides to be, is an interesting thought, and it's one that I feel goes underappreciated in discussions of A Christmas Carol. Speaking of Belle, she brings us to one of the best scenes of the film. Scrooge is brought to the memory of another Christmas after begging it be kept from him. He and Belle argue over delays to their wedding, and we see Belle realize that she can't stay with this man who's only interested in the material. She walks away as a musical cue seems to be fading out.
Both the text and the paratext of this scene really bum me out. In short, the theatrical cut of this film, and every re-release spare the Laserdisc version, is incomplete. They had a song for Belle, but they cut it because it was too sad. Oh well, with the internet being what it is, it's available on YouTube, and it's even in the album on Spotify.
When Love Is Gone is possibly the best song of the film. It's definitely the best performed, with Meredith Braun bringing the emotion to new heights. She has the musical strength and vulnerability that made songs like Burn, On My Own, or even It's Over, Isn't It, as impactful as they are. I really like the blocking. She hardly looks at Scrooge because she knows that no level of comfort is going to convince her that this relationship can survive. When the elderly Scrooge sees her, the editing makes it seem like they're looking right at each other. Scrooge now understands that he could have been the person she wanted him to be. He was just too selfish. Scrooge even joins in on the song, with his voice teary and at some points completely trounced by Belle. She's overwhelming him even now. Scrooge looks at Belle, on the brink of a breakdown. She turns as she reaches her crescendo and stops. She can't see him. She can't give him another chance. She's just a shadow of the past. Scrooge cries. The audience may cry. Rizzo cries, and that paddleball tone I mentioned is preserved. Shortly after Scrooge returns to his bed, he meets the second, or possibly fourth, spirit of the night, the Ghost of Christmas Present. He's a lot easier on the eyes than the Ghost of Christmas Past, with a serious case of dad bod. He has this really cute quirk of having a really short memory, because his life only lasts a day. He shrinks down in this pretty sweet effect and takes Scrooge to the streets of London on Christmas Day, with a significantly less sweet effect. This looks like what people who don't watch Doctor Who think Doctor Who is. We see a caroller get severely concussed and the film kicks into a pseudo-maybe reprise. It feels like Christmas is one more Sleep Till Christmas's bigger, more popular cousin. The lyrics reflect the same philosophy and even the inflections mirror each other. Listen.
Like Christmas, Christmas.
But whereas that was a quieter solo, this ensemble number is big and bold. It isn't particularly great as a standalone song, with music and lyrics being serviceable and little more, but like these other songs, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. We get so many shots of Muppets going about the holiday, and it's all so heartwarming. The Mises make their long-anticipated return.
Thank God!
And the only valid counter-argument to ACAB.
Spirit, I had no idea. I wish to see friends, kin. Show me family.
When the song ends, Scrooge is taken to see how his nephew is spending Christmas.
Jesus Christ, this man's considered poor?
I could fit my whole flat in this room. The scene is pretty ubiquitous in most tellings of the story. We see Fred, his wife, and their friends playing a guessing game. Through this, we see Scrooge's character start to change. He tries to insert himself in the game, only to have been the butt of the joke the whole time. The film brings us to check in on the Cratchit family. We see Emily Cratchit, played by the pig prima donna Miss Piggy, and their daughters. Like Fozzie, Miss Piggy doesn't really get much screen time at all, but she does steal every moment she can, even when she's ripping jokes off of Spaceballs.
Belinda!
Chew your gum.
Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim enter the scene with a little ditty the soundtrack calls Christmas Scat. Besides having the greatest name of all time, it's a super cute moment that establishes Bob's relationship with his son. As Scrooge and our narrators drop in, the family sits down to enjoy what meagre Christmas dinner they can afford. We see Bob and Emily clash over Scrooge, but it's placated by Tiny Tim, just in time for a brilliant story beat and a very passable song. It falls victim to the Muppet song problem as much of Bob's solo did, and it lacks the fun visuals to offset it. Granted, this isn't a fun song. Bless Us All is an earnest, Christmassy, count your blessings type song. It shows the purity of Tiny Tim, which is basically the main drive for the rest of the film. It fully achieves what it wants, and if you're willing to connect emotionally, this can be such a potent moment. However, if you're a child with a short attention span, or a 1992 film critic, this song will probably be the biggest drag of the film. Scrooge stares at Tiny Tim as the world around him disappears. We see shame on his face, as the ghost of Christmas Present takes Scrooge to his final venue, where he withers away, giving Scrooge a moment of solitude. A dense fog washes over the scene, and we find the ghost of Christmas yet to come, laying in wait, as if he'd been there all along. This towering figure stands statuesque, immune to Scrooge's attempts at charm. The design is simple, serious, and striking, with a black cloak, discoloured hands, and a silhouette just uncanny enough to be uncomfortable. Gonzo and Rizzo make a quick appearance, just to say that they'll be leaving the film for a bit.
This was definitely the right call. This part of the film was meant to be dire and oppressive, and any comedy could easily ruin that.
The ghost leads Scrooge through a wormhole and back to the streets to hear people commenting on the death of some mysterious person.
I say mysterious. The twist is always obvious, but Scrooge asks anyway. It's as far as his denial will stretch before it snaps.
The pair find a back alley dealing with the dead man's possessions. The dealer here is fantastic, with spider limbs and scruff like a proto-Samhain trickster. Scrooge starts to feel his fears confirmed, but instead of panicking or breaking down, he tries to deny his own mortality, as if that will somehow make what he's realized untrue. He turns to the spirit and begs to be shown some form of kindness. When the spirit takes him to Bob Cratchit's house, he seems happy, as does the score for a moment. But there's something off. None of the joy we saw earlier. The camera's even at a Dutch angle, which makes the already slanted houses into a dark spiral. This levity can't last, and we hear that on Scrooge's voice. He peeks in to see Emily Cratchit weeping, in what must have been an impossible scene for Frank Oz and Steve Whitmire. Bob comes in, and we see a mirror of his earlier greeting, now devoid of energy. Bob and Emily talk about Bob's time at the churchyard. It becomes clear Tiny Tim is gone. The fact that Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog can have a serious conversation about the death of their child is a testament to how strong this film's tone is. Even though the audience spends very little time with the family, and a good portion of that is a pretty boring song, this scene shows how sincere and joyous their love was, more noticeable now in its absence. The spirit isn't done with Scrooge yet, as he returns him to the churchyard. Scrooge asks who could have been so abhorrent that his death was celebrated, even though he feels he already knows the answer. As the camera tracks over, we get a visual of a headstone with Scrooge in the background. In this perspective, it's as tall as he is. The shot tells us a life squandered on selfishness is naught but a great death. There remain a few more interactions of Scrooge's denial, as he somberly marches towards the grave. He dusts off the snow and uncovers the name, Ebenezer Scrooge. He cries, launching into a short but powerful monologue where he vows not to let this future be his own. Kane's performance climaxes here. With nothing reacting to him, he releases his inhibitions and breaks. It's quite chilling to watch. He goes to his knees and begs the ghost, tugging at his robes when he falls and awakens in his bed. Gonzo and Rizzo return to bring the story to an end. We see Scrooge move with a new lease on life and finally decide to share his enormous wealth with the masses. Thankful Heart is a fun song, even if it reminds the audience that Kane isn't the strongest singer. Musically, it provides just the right amount of energy to pick up the tone from the dirge of Christmas Future, and visually, it gives the audience a nice retrospective on the film, as we see Scrooge visiting Sam Eagle and Fozzie, his nephew, and even gives cheeses to the Mises. Now that's what I call narrative closure, baby. Woo! I do have one greedy wish for this song, though. In the soundscape for Scrooge, footsteps and a cane can be heard. It creates a nice bit of percussion that services the song. If that was repeated here, it could add one last little bow to the story. The parade reaches the Cratchit house and Scrooge decides to approach alone. He stares down Bob like a dreaded god, starting to reprimand him. Miss Piggy comes in to remind us that she is a national treasure, and Scrooge reveals the feast that he's brought them. We see dozens of Muppets pour into the house, and Gonzo provides a little epilogue in time for the last song. Below We Found is an inversion of that other song that doesn't exist, turning it into a massive choral number. It's a clever way of showing Scrooge's growth, showing him with all these friends he's now gained. It does make me lament the removal of When Love Is Gone, but it's all too charming to stay mad at. Seeing all these Muppets together singing, it's just heartwarming.
The Muppet Christmas Carol had a lukewarm reception at its release, and it's not impossible to see why.
The soundtrack has some duds. It requires a lot of emotional investment for a family film, and as with all comedy, your mileage may vary. But revisiting it has affirmed how much I love it. The songs that work are amazing, the production design is perfect, the cinematography had so much thought put into it. But the film's strongest feature to me has to be that paddleball tone. It's a wild comedy that has no problem taking itself seriously when it wants to be tragic.
Maybe that's why it became so much more popular over time, with shows like Steven Universe or BoJack Horseman being so rife with comedy and tragedy. Modern audiences are way more willing to go from joy to despair and back again. And maybe that's why 28 years later, the film's still getting revised.
At time of writing, it's just been revealed that Disney is remastering the film for 4K. In an interview with the BBC, Brian Henson revealed that the long-lost song When Love Is Gone was part of that remastering, and the film would soon be whole again.
Maybe not in time for this Christmas, but hopefully 2021. Whenever it is, I will be more than happy to watch Scrooge relive his life and become a better person all over again.